We are going to dive back into Ezra and Nehemiah for a much briefer visit this time. We're actually going to give a lot of the service this morning to prayer for reasons that are related to the world situation, but also to what we're going to be reading about in Ezra and Nehemiah. Good. This morning, I walked out the door without my Bible. So if you ever feel like you're not doing Christianity properly, your pastor forgot his Bible this morning. I have got a phone. And I have been solo parenting this weekend, and that's my excuse. But honestly, but we're in Nehemiah chapter 1. And let's just start off by reading. So we're going to read all of chapter 1 and just a little bit of the beginning of chapter 2. Now, most weeks that we've been in Ezra and Nehemiah, I've done a bit of a recap of the story so far. I'm not going to do that this time, because you've now got a choice of like 4 weeks that you could listen to and get a recap of where we've got to so far. Okay, so I might give just a couple of words of context afterwards, but largely we're just going to dig into this passage. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, "Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We've acted very wickedly towards you. We've not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name.' They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man." I was cupbearer to the king. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it that you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so they'll provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the city, for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I'll occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. That's where we're stopping today. There's 4 themes that I just want to pick up that run through this, and we're going to look at them briefly. And the first one, which I think perhaps comes out most strongly, is just prayer. I say just prayer. I mean, world-changing prayer. You can't ever really say just prayer, can you? You know, when Nehemiah hears about the plight of the Israelites, bearing in mind he lives 900 miles away, when he hears about the plight of the Israelites, he is immediately grieved. Why do we think he's grieved when he hears this? Because that city and the people who live there are in his heart well before he hears this update on their welfare. They're in his heart because I believe he's already praying for them. That seems to be the kind of the expectation from what we read. But certainly, when he hears about them, his response is prayer. Prayer shapes hearts. If you pray for something regularly, it changes your heart towards that thing, that person, that place. It's not the only purpose. It's probably not even the primary purpose. But the more we commit to praying for the things that God cares about in this world, the more our hearts will be formed to care about what he cares about. That's partly because our time is part of our treasure, right? Jesus taught that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if we're pouring our prayer, and particularly that precious time that we set aside where we're not doing anything else and we're trying to be away from other people, to pray for things that God cares about, then our hearts start to line up with his. Just a couple of things about the prayer as well. He starts off by grieving in prayer. Now, we don't do that very much corporately, and that is probably partly because I'm not very good at it, and so I don't take a lead. I do grieve in prayer privately sometimes for things, but actually it is appropriate, and you just have to go to the Psalms and see how many Psalms just start off with the psalmist going, Lord God, things are broken. Like sometimes it's personal. My enemies are surrounding me. Strong bulls of Bashan are surround me. You know, you might remember that one from 22. But sometimes it's, you know, your city's in ruins. Your people are being destroyed. God, where are you? There's this grieving that we can do in prayer. And in that context, he fasts as well. We talked about this last week. But part of fasting can just be an expression of grief. Like, God, I know you care about this, and I care about this, you know, some fraction of what you care about, and this is wrong. And God, I don't feel like eating. I feel like calling out to you. Would you change things? And I want to encourage you, this is a valid way to pray. And it's probably easier to start praying like that on your own, or perhaps in 2s, 3s, 4s, because it's a sort of a slightly odd dynamic to try and bring together on a Sunday morning. But I want to encourage you, like, grieve in prayer about the things that grieve God's heart. Because he grieves over his people. He grieves over a world that is turning away from him. He grieves over a world that is full of the consequences of sin. He grieves over people choosing to turn and follow their own way instead of following him. And it's good for us to grieve with him. And then what does he do after he's grieved? Well, he appeals to who God is. In our home group at the moment, we're making our way through that wonderful passage in Exodus 34, the Lord, the gracious and compassionate God that I prayed out of earlier. I just want to encourage you, like, dig into passages like that where God reveals his character and call on him in accordance with his character. It's not like some magic technique, but it is consistently what people do all the way through the scriptures, in the Psalms, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. Like, God, this is what you're like, so please would you show it this way? And I want to encourage us, we can do that. Like, we can't stand on our own promises. We're told not even to swear by things because actually we're not in control. But God is in control and his character is good and perfect. And we can appeal to him and pray in line with his promises. So prayer. Nehemiah is committed to persevering in prayer. In fact, between that time that he hears the news and the time that he ends up having the conversation with the king is 4 months, we think. There's some odd things about how the years are counted. It's at least 4 months. In the 20th year of Artaxerxes, from Kislev through to Nisan, which is actually from the end of a Jewish year to a beginning of a next Jewish year. And he's praying through that time. So he's committed to persevering in prayer. The next thing that I want to say is Nehemiah knows what his vision is. Now, Artaxerxes at this point is the most powerful man anywhere that he could possibly have gone. I mean, I don't know what empires were going on elsewhere in the world. My history isn't that good. Perhaps there was a Chinese dynasty which was also hugely powerful, I'm not sure. But certainly in this part of the world, Artaxerxes is the number one. And he says to Nehemiah, what do you want me to do for you? And Nehemiah has an answer ready. Now, this ties in a little bit with things we've been talking about before, but like, what if the God who is sovereign over heaven and earth said to you, Gordon, what do you want me to do for you? What's your answer? Alan, what do you want me to do for you? Priscilla, what do you want me to do for you? Jen, what do you want me to do for you? What's your answer? Nehemiah has prayed into this, and this faith has risen in him. And he's like, I want to see the walls of Jerusalem restored. Now, there are other things that were wrong in exile. They were being oppressed by people around them. The temple was a shadow of what it had formerly been. There were still lots of people living in nations all around who had not been regathered. And he could have said any of those things, but Nehemiah knew it was walls. For him, it was walls. Okay? And when Artaxerxes said, what do you want me to do? He's like, right, here's what I want. I want timber, I want people, I want money, I want letters of safe passage so I can see the walls rebuilt. And I want to encourage you to have that kind of faith in your heart. It's faith because it's all wasted thought if God doesn't do it. And it's wasted heart longing if God doesn't do it. Like, you're starting to commit in your heart, I want to see this thing happen. And the more you commit your heart to that, the more you're disappointed if it doesn't. And so it's a step of faith to allow yourself to dream. I often use the NHS as an example in this because I know we have a number of people who work in it, and it feels beyond the change of any individual. But like, if God said to you, Angela, like, what do you want me to do for your department in children's services? Or what do you want me to do for you, Sarah, in sonography? What would you say? I want to encourage you to dare to dream of what you could ask the Lord for. Because Nehemiah is actually very bold. Where does that boldness come from? Well, it's interesting. If you go into the end of his prayer in chapter 1, so do you remember what I said? It's 4 months from when he hears about Jerusalem and immediately starts praying and fasting. And after a few days, he prays this prayer. So 4 months between then and him talking to King Artaxerxes. But he says this, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayers of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. So today, he doesn't say anything for 4 months, but he's clearly already got in his head, and this man can only be Artaxerxes, right? Give me favor in his sight. That's what counts. And so he sets himself to praying. And I imagine that maybe every day, or certainly frequently every week, he's praying like, God, give me favor today. Give me favor today. Give me favor with the king today. Give me favor with the king today. And one day it happens and he's ready and he's bold because he's going every day saying, God, if today is the day, I want to be ready. I know you've given this dream to me. I know it's in my heart. I want to be ready today. I want to be ready today. Now, you could end up 3.5 months down feeling really discouraged. And I want to encourage you, if you are praying regularly, and I know many of you are praying regularly for family members to come to faith. I know you're praying for your workplaces. I know you're praying for your friendship groups. And if it hasn't happened, do not be discouraged. Keep praying, because you might be month 3.5, and the opportunity comes in month 4. The people of Israel are wandering in the desert and they start grumbling against Moses, and they have this whole sort of, we're going to go back to Egypt, and Moses brings water out of the rock. They were just a day away from Elim, where there's an oasis and palm trees. Like, God's provision was just around the corner, and they got fed up and they grumbled. Like, don't get fed up with the Lord. Don't be disheartened if you have to persevere. I'm sure that Nehemiah was bolder and more prepared to ask what he did because he had persevered in prayer. We can do the same. And he was bold because being downcast in the presence of the king would probably have been seen as a dishonor. So, whether it was a choice to show his displeasure that day or whether he just couldn't contain how much he felt for Jerusalem. Remember Artaxerxes, we read in the book of Ezra, Artaxerxes has had a letter to him already from the governors over in Jerusalem saying, stop the building. This is a rebellious city. And he's given a decree to stop the building. So Artaxerxes has played his hand against Jerusalem already and said, no, this rebuilding shouldn't go on. And now here's his cupbearer saying, the city's in ruins. How can I be happy? Would you rebuild it? This is seriously bold stuff. But it also shows the value of Nehemiah being where God has placed him. You know, his governors are the other side of the empire, and they're writing to him and saying, oh, we should be concerned about this city. But the cupbearer is right next to him. He's a trusted person. You have to be probably one of the most trusted people in the kingdom, because you would taste before you passed it to the king to make sure it's not poison. Also one of the most dangerous jobs, I guess. Quite a lot of poisoning went on if you read the stories of these kings. So the trusted person next to him, who God's placed in that place, raised to that position for that purpose, says something different from what the governor says the other side of the empire, because God's placed him there and his words carry with the king. So prayer, vision, boldness. The last thing I want to say is about nations, because acts and decisions that happen in Babylon and in Persia have consequences that stretch well beyond their immediate boundaries. And Nehemiah is cupbearer to the king. Who does he serve? And on one level, he serves Artaxerxes. But really, when you see his life, he serves the Lord. And because he serves the Lord, he's also a faithful servant to Artaxerxes, right? He looks like he's beholden to a secular power, but really he serves the Lord. This is true of you. It's true of me. Well, I suppose I'm beholden to a secular power under the state, aren't I? My employer is not secular, I'm glad to say. But if you're working for a secular employer, when you pay your taxes, when you obey the law, you know, we look as though we're under a secular power, but actually we're really under the power, the great power, the Lord God. And under that, there are other powers in place, but really we are servants of the Most High. And let's remember that when you walk into your workplace, if you're still employed, when you walk down the street, when you go into a friend's house, you go there as an outpost of the kingdom of God. Nehemiah, his position affects nations. I wonder if that could be true for any of us. We'll be hearing a bit more about that in a minute. There's another little tidbit here which might be interesting. So you'll have different names for the kings if you read through your Bible in different translations. And the reason is that this is written in a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic, these two books. And they're using transliterations of kings' names or sometimes kings' titles. And actually, if you read this, it doesn't say Artaxerxes, it says Ahasuerus. Try saying that when you've not got your teeth in. Ahasuerus, that's it, Ahasuerus. And people have tried to work out who is this Ahasuerus? And he could be Xerxes or he could be Artaxerxes, and we just don't actually know. The same is true in the book of Esther. So when it says that Esther married King Xerxes, it might actually have been King Artaxerxes, and we're not fully sure. And the fact is we're still trying to piece together that chronology. But I just want to note that Artaxerxes has set himself against the rebuilding of Jerusalem. He has this letter from his governors. We read about it in Ezra. He says, yes, stop the rebuilding. And then there's a change of heart at some point. And in the 20th year, he says, yes, go with all of my blessing and lots of money. Now, that could simply have been Nehemiah, or that could also be that Esther and Mordecai has played out in this gap as well. It's really interesting that it says the king with the queen sitting next to him. Now, you don't read that normally when you're talking about the ongoings of the royal court. It's possible. This is not simply like a madcap theory. It's also not that. We don't know at this point. I hope one day we'll get some more archaeology and we will find out. But it's quite possible that's Esther sitting next to him, having already interceded on behalf of the Jews. And if so, you've also got Mordecai being one of the highest powers in the kingdom at this point. If that's not the case, that's a generation before, but they've still sowed in all of that goodness and they've become trusted people. Mordecai saved Artaxerxes, either Artaxerxes himself or his dad Xerxes, from a coup d'etat where he was going to be killed by his bodyguards. He became the highest sort of under the king, the highest in the kingdom. He had great influence. Esther and Mordecai were raised to their position to affect nations as well. Zana started off this meeting by talking about how we are all connected. Joel wasn't able to keep up because we were shouting out all these countries, and you had to find them as well, and some of them were this small on the screen. Whoever said Liechtenstein, funny sense of humour, thank you. Good luck looking for that little dot. But we're all connected, and God has a heart for all nations. And it's really exciting that we have a mission support group that's part of this church that help to steward not just our financial giving, but also our prayer and our support for projects, not just in the UK, but in the nation and for people. We are connected, and we're committed to remaining a church that give generously beyond ourselves, financially, but also in time and prayer and support. There's a mission prayer meeting, first Sunday of the month. You could make it a double bill. You can come here for the 9:30 and then 9:45 go to the mission prayer meeting. But I just want to encourage you, those are really focused times. There's an update that goes out in advance. So when you get in there, you can just get praying. You don't spend lots of time talking about the biscuit. You just get praying. It's really good, focused time. It's one of my frustrations that because I'm always setting up here, I'm not able to be in that meeting. But I want to say, come along. It's exciting. Because then you hear updates of what's happening and you see that God is answering prayers and God has raised you to a position where you can influence nations. That's exciting. We're going to spend some time praying now. We're going to hear a little bit about some stuff that's going on in our nation. We're going to hear some things about what's going on in the nation. And then we're going to pray. And if you're wondering where church notices come, I know a couple of you are sitting on some. We'll do that at the very end. But I just feel like actually having seen how God works in prayer, we want to follow that through by praying. So I'm going to hand over to Zana to lead us on from here.